Certainly. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us. And you know, when he's in, we knock off quickly. So I hope everyone has a safe and happy holiday long weekend. I'm Phil Davis. I'm our Chief Business Officer at AtData, and I'm excited to be able to share with our team lessons learned. We went through a pretty exciting process, but let me introduce the folks who are also going to share their lessons. Brian, why don't you give a quick intro?
Hey everyone, Brian Cardona, President at AtData. Look forward to sharing a little more about our story today.
Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Burke, CEO of AtData and formerly founder of TowerData, and definitely thank everyone for joining us today.
And we have our expert who led us through this process, Dirk.
Yeah, my name is Dirk Kamata. My background is in branding. I'm working with companies like AtData to redefine their brands and work on their brand identities. And I also teach branding at the School of Visual Arts in Parsons in New York. And thank you for inviting me to this. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. I think, Lizzie, let's take it away, Lizzie.
Okay. Well, first things first, the question with any rebrand is, how did we all come to this decision to rebrand in the first place? I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. So what really spurred on this rebrand initiative?
I'll take that. So, you know, AtData, now AtData is really the unification and merger of two companies that both had 20-year histories, TowerData and FreshAddress. So we merged back in October of last year, and at the time that we did our press release and announced it, you know, we hadn't really decided what was our go-forward branding strategy. So if you look at that press release then, it's like, well, we have the merger of TowerData and FreshAddress, and it's a combined company, but that what that combined name is or what name is going to be used was sort of left unsaid. So we needed to figure out what we were going to do, and you know, it was also having an impact to the team. We were had separate calendars, separate email systems, so there was an impact of productivity. So it wasn't just, hey, what is our position with the marketplace, but it was having an internal impact as well, and you know, we really felt the need to figure it out quickly. And as we thought about the approach, you know, we had TowerData and FreshAddress, you know, with this long respected histories and a lot of brand equity. So we, you know, obviously the first thing you think of is, well, maybe we should pick one of these two names. Or, you know, as we thought about it, we thought, well, we felt the FreshAddress name might be a little too limited and just in scope for you know, our ambitions for the future. TowerData had some additional services that FreshAddress didn't have. We were also starting to bring on prevention solutions. And so, you know, we thought, all right, well, possibly we could use TowerData, but again, we sort of came back to that team, you know, that we were merging as two equals, wanting to get the team behind a single identity, and we felt it'd be best for all involved. And after talking with the board and actually even a couple of our clients, we thought, well, even though it's a little scary, why don't we try to find a new brand that, you know, it's not one or the other, TowerData or FreshAddress, but a new direction that the company is going to go forward and attack. You know, but that's obviously scary. You know, we all the reputation that we built up over 20 years is how much are we going to have to spend to increase brand awareness of this new brand. But we decided that that really would be the best for us and for what we wanted to do. So once we've made that decision of, okay, let's rebrand, and then you have to think about, like, okay, what is that about? What is this new brand going to be? And Jen, if you could bring up the first slide. So we started thinking about the DNA of this brand, and we got some help from the founder of FreshAddress, Bill Kaplan and Austin Bliss, and again, surveying amongst ourselves, and what are the key characteristics of our companies, and in that combination, what we want to achieve going forward. So we've always prided ourselves on being nimble and in the way we approach the market, offering new services, on a periodic basis, and that trust factor is very important. We're a partner to many great companies. They are entrusting us with their customer data or the data of their clients as well. And that's a key aspect of, particularly in these days of keeping all those assets in a protected form. We think we stand out from our competition, in terms of the technology, APIs that we have. We are comprehensive in the type of data that we collect, and attaching email address using email address as a central identifier, but connecting to cookies, postal addresses, mobile device IDs, etc. So you can see here on the slide some of the other characteristics that we thought about, but okay, there's a whole list here, and from there it's like, all right, we have to come up with a name, and Brian, you could probably speak to that process best.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Tom. So the naming, as Tom mentioned, the naming piece, it was a little scary. We're like, all right, how do we do this? We know, all right, I think everyone was in agreement that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? With what we have with TowerData and FreshAddress. And so how do we bring it together? One thing that we knew, or that we were lucky to have, was FreshAddress trademarked the email address experts, right? So we knew we had that, and now how do we work with that to come up with a names on top of it? And yeah, so the group brainstormed, came up with a bunch of ideas. We created a naming criteria evaluation sheet. We circulated that across key stakeholders, internal and external, and kind of bore down on @ or some version of the @ For those that are familiar with the two brands previously, both had the @ in the logo, and Dirk's going to share more on how that all came together. But yeah, so just working, it's probably, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks of conversation around, where do we think we're going to be with this, and honing it down, and evaluating scores, and then the legal research necessary, right? So engaging with a law firm to do all the background work to make sure that the name was available, the domain research, what domains are available, top level domains, and so on for the things that we wanted. And so yeah, it was a pretty involved process, and definitely at some point, I think the team just got together and said, all right, we've got it as close as we think we can get it, and let's take that leap of faith from here.
Yeah, and so from there, this is where Dirk comes in, right? So determining brand design, logo development, all of that stuff. How does that process work? And Dirk, I would love if you could shed some light on that.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting. I think one of the first things I would point out is that it's always important to acknowledge that when it gets to the design process and during building an identity, it's really important not to treat that as a beauty contest. Just like Tom outlined, like how important it is to be strategic about the naming process. That same strategic approach has to be applied to the design process as well. So it's basically an extension of the company's strategy and of the company's vision. Aside from that, it also needs to check off some other key boxes. It needs to be something that is, of course, appropriate for the type of business and for the type of company. The design needs to be distinctive in the marketplace, so it needs to be ultimately be ownable in the marketplace. It also needs to be applicable to all the different types of environments and channels where the organization interacts with its audiences. So think about brand experience. It needs to work on a smartphone just as well. It has to work exceptionally well in a trade show setting where where the identity might be on a large overhead sign at a trade show stand. Of course, in this instance, we also had this additional kind of challenge or situation where there was two companies coming together. Always interesting when companies merge. How do you make sure that the new entity acknowledges the cultures that both of these companies bring together, respects those, and carries the best of both into this what this new brand becomes. Of course, part of this process, we also looked at the legacy businesses, and we analyzed, okay, what is there? How do TowerData and FreshAddress currently present themselves to the marketplace? What are their promises? How are these promises carried across? Which is really what the role of a brand identity is. Like, brand is often kind of misunderstood. The brand is really how your audiences perceives you, what happens in their mind. That is what the brand is. The brand is not the logo, the brand is not colors. Those are just basically elements we use to carry across what we want people to think about us and make it easier to see what we believe, how we want to be perceived, essentially. So, and of course, part of this process, also like a critical part of this process, was also talking to people on different levels and different functions within the organizations of both of these legacy businesses to understand what are their needs. What do they think works well currently? What do they think is the vision and the opportunity for the future when these two businesses come together? So yeah, and then from there, we really started kind of like creating this blueprint for us, which is, we really like to think about that as a creative brief that assigns all these parameters of learnings, of this analysis of the space, the analysis of the legacy businesses, the analysis of the opportunity and the vision, into setting parameters for the design process. The design process, of course, starts with an exploratory of looking at different kind of things. That's also an important thing to understand. What I feel, there's always anxiety, of course, anxiety on the client side. We want to get this right? We have to get this right. What our clients tell, like, what is important to keep in mind, there isn't just one solution that is there for you, right? Like when you think about Nike, Apple, all these brands we're very familiar with. Of course, now we say, yeah, this is their logo, like that, this is what it has to be. But it could have been different things and that may have worked just as well. The fact that they ended up with this, whatever they selected, worked well. It works well, but there isn't just one solution. So that's an important thing to understand. When we start the exploratory process, we look at different angles, and we kind of like, when you think about those brand DNA that Tom walked us through earlier, we play around a little bit like with the volume buttons on all of those. We turn them up slightly differently to really look at, what if we push this brand a little bit more towards this DNA and like make that the star? What would that look like? And vice versa, with others. When it comes to the design process, really what I believe is key there is simplicity. There's a brilliant, one of the early partners of Pentagram, which is like one of the most reputable design firms in the world, really. And I was lucky enough to work with him many years ago in London. He's basically established this approach that is a very simple approach for identity design. When you're creating an identity, the goal is for us is to enable our audiences to identify who we are. That's what we want to do through identity. It's already in the word, of course. So how do we do this? The best thing to do this, the best thing to send signals to someone to be easily understood is to send them signals that they easily understand, like cliches almost. That's the first step of this approach. The second step of the approach is like, okay, you now have sent a signal that people easily understand, but it's a cliche. How do you make this interesting? So give it a little twist, show it in a new way, add something to it, surprise people, send them a signal they understand, but surprise them to essentially get them to listen and get them to pay attention. And I think, you know, what we ended up with here for AtData is a perfect example of this approach. Tom and Brian mentioned already both legacy brands, TowerData and FreshAddress, obviously had the @ symbol as part of their logo. That is like a very iconic symbol for what both of these companies do. So this is really checking off the first box. You know, everyone gets this. But then we looked at like, okay, so this is for us an opportunity to transfer something that both legacy companies bringing to the table, they jointly own, to transfer this into the new brand. But is there a way for us to show this in a new kind of way? If you stay on that slide for 1 second, sorry. And this is really where this, you know, where the design of the symbol is based on, right? The @ symbol is in there, but there's also an A and a D in there that of course stands for AtData. And by adding this outer layer to it, we're also getting this notion of a fingerprint, which is obviously very kind of like affiliated with like identity of people and email identity. And also kind of like that notion of there's a source, an energy there, like something that this company empowers their customers and other audiences to do. Yeah, so the next step from there is, and again, we landed on this through a process of looking at different direction. But the next step, once you landed on something, is then like, how do we codify this? How do we create rules for how this is supposed to be used? So we're talking always with the same kind of language. We're creating something that is memorable, that people identify, that works equally well in across different channels. If you switch to the next slide, it's really the foundation of building some brand guidelines. So we looked at like, you know, how's the logo being used? What is our color approach? What are the typography tools we're using? Icons, imagery, and other graphic elements that create a coherent look and feel for this language, for this brand. Something that we also do very early in the process of our design development, if you switch to the next slide, is we're looking at, okay, how does this direction look in the context of key touch points that this brand will have with its audiences, like a product brochure, like on the website, like on merchandise or on apparel, when it has to work very small, on a pen, on a business card, and so forth. So we're guiding the client really through this process to make them comfortable to see like, yeah, this would work, you know, across all these different touch points. And based from there, we're then translating this whole approach into implementation and activation, which I think Brian is going to talk about more. But just to quickly launch this off, there's a lot of anxiety and energy at the client side there typically, you know, to get this out now. It has to be approached very strategically, because like what I tell clients always also is, you know, don't expect everything to be ready on day one and just make the switch and all of a sudden everything is, it's sometimes not possible and sometimes quite frankly not feasible to do this. So it needs to be done strategically. You need to select out what are the most important touch points where our brand needs to have the most impact, that we take on to launch this and create excitement in the marketplace as well as internally.
Yeah, and I think, Dirk, as we went through the process and we prepared for the process, we really recognized, look, a rebrand isn't just about a name and a logo. It also is about the story and really organizing everything you do around a single story that adds value and meaning to all your various stakeholders, right? So how does it work for your existing customers? What's the meaning to your prospective customers, to your board, and to your employees? It's in many ways it becomes a rally cry. And what's really exciting is that our logo and our name, as it appears, tells a lot about our story. We put that email address front and center, and that's front and center in everything we do as an organization. And there you see it in our logo and in our name, front and center. And when I look at the colors, and we spent a lot of time talking about color, you know, we have a fading color. It goes from purple to blue and across. And then for us, it allows us to think about how we meet our customers where they need to be. Not everybody is one color. right? And as an organization, we pride ourselves on being flexible and meeting customers where they need to be. And so many of those things we were able to translate from this story to a visual identity, and then, you know, really go far and, you know, and carry that identity. And, you know, we love seeing, you know, it on a pen and on our cups and sharing it at trade shows. It's been a very exciting process. However, frankly, getting there was super challenging and required, after this identity process, a tremendous amount of effort from so many people in the organization. So Brian, you want to talk a little bit about, you know, organizationally, how did we make all this happen in 3.5 months?
Yeah, sure, Phil. And, you know, right, it touched everybody in the organization. And so, you know, we pulled together a team to get that master worksheet of each functional area, you know, each of the tasks necessary for that group, and then a timeline, you know, for when things needed to get done. So obviously the heavy lift is with the marketing and the front of the house. But as Tom mentioned, we also had the two organizations coming together. So there was a lot of IT and admin to be considered as well, and plenty of surprises along the way, such as you know, on the back end side, they're updating logos, and you know, we thought we had timing just right to do a big reveal to the team internally, and suddenly there's the logo visible to the team. And so plenty of challenges that way, which were you know, I think with the right attitudes handled and you know, well and accepted by the team. But yeah, overall, you know, we just approached it with, you know, typical project management organization, regular meetings with each of the stakeholders and follow-ups, and, you know, and making sure the big pieces were in place first. And it continues, right? We're still getting surprises. We had one this week where a TowerData email address was returning a FreshAddress signature when either one of those should have been the case. Should be AtData now. And so, but yeah, just a big project, and you know, it's a tribute to just having a strong team with good leadership to make sure everyone's on the same page and moving towards those deadlines.
Yeah, and speaking of big projects, the website was definitely one of those. So we're talking about back-end technology and getting the team sorted, but Phil, I know you played a critical role essentially in getting some of the website stuff done. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I played a supporting role. Lizzie played a very critical role and did an amazing job of getting this website built fast. But the challenge you have is, how do you tell your story and translate it into the website, but also make sure you have all the practical requirements that you need in that website, all working on day one, right? So that's your challenge. And in the process of figuring out, how do we architect the brand? What does our product features look like? Who are we speaking to, right? How are we, you know, helping our clients along their journey while all staying true to the story? We really kind of hit on this approach of trying to think through our galvanizing story. You know, who we are, why do we exist, what do we add to the ecosystem, what do we mean to our stakeholders? And as we began writing out this story and translating it, and I don't think it'll ever be done, we really, you know, were able to then allow the different components of the website to come to life. Brian, do you want to talk a little bit more about that galvanizing story? I know you really helped keep us on task.
Yeah, and you know, and I really got into the galvanizing story. I think it was recommended by one of our board members, John Miller, and it turns out, so I think Doug Kessler is the person who kind of is the originator of it. And you know, it's just building the narrative around your brand, as I think Dirk and Phil have touched on. And so there's 5 parts to this story, and you know, we focused hard on helping us, the whole team, you know, who are we, where do we want to go? Externally, the 5 parts are the change in the world, and then the new potential is the second, then the obstacle, the breakthrough, and the payoff. And so it really forced us as a team to bear down and answer a lot of questions there. And as Phil said, it's a work in progress. And But it is a great document. So I mean, if there's folks here listening today that are considering, hey, do we want to consider rebrand with our organization? I think it's an excellent exercise for the team just to keep everyone focused. I'm not going to tell you that the AtData galvanizing story now, but hopefully the website is doing a good job of reflecting it, and it's continuing to kind of influence all of the marketing that we do, and also internally, right? It helps our sales team and all of our client-facing folks know that when they're interacting, here's what AtData does, here's why we do it, here's why it's important to you as a client.
I think that's also an important aspect of even without that story, it needs, the whole team needs to live and breathe it, and so part of our objective, not just in terms of getting the marketing materials, everything ready, but you need to get the team on board with what the new message. And I'd add that the Galvanizing Story doesn't necessarily have to be for a rebrand, but if you want to think about your positioning, tighten that up, it's I think very helpful. The other thing that was a big deal during architecting the new website was sort of what the brand architecture of we were combining services for two companies. And it'd been a while since we'd updated the website previously, so it gave us an opportunity to rethink about the different silos of our services. We're not a single service company. We're not just email validation, for example. So sometimes to convey the breadth of services that we offer is a little hard to do, and not to lose people. It's like, whoa, what's going on here? There's so many choices. And so we, I think, had maybe 4 silos before. We sort of brought it down to 3. Well, I guess now it's still 4 actually, but we changed what they are, in terms of verification, email verification, our identity matching, which includes email PIN, email change of address. We have our engagement set of services, which is our email activity data, open data, and helping to segment and list, et cetera. And our anonymous website visitor identification, and then our new silo, which is fraud prevention, which I mentioned earlier. So again, just that exercise of how does this all fit together? When someone is looking at our brand, how do they understand what we do and how it all fits together, and how is it going to speak to them? So that was it. That was a key thing.
Yeah, and I think as we thought through that, the way it relates to the Galvanizing Story was for us is we really focused on what's our moment of truth with our client. Like, where's that big moment of impact? And for us, our customers, they capture first-party data and they want to take great action on it. And what we recognize is that moment they capture that data, we help make that first-party data work better for you. We help you do it in a safe, secure way that helps you maximize the ROI you get from your data. And so everything we build sits around how are we making that first-party data more valuable? And we keep thinking about that. And so as we continue to look at our product roadmap, this Galvanizing Story, this entire event was really critical in helping us, find our position and our place. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that you finish your website, you finish your rebrand, and then you got to write press releases, do announcements. You need to amplify your voice. And without that story, it's very hard to write the press release. It would be very hard to write your message. The words that we put in, we're able to fit them in to all of our other messaging so that, we really have this clear, concise, objective that we wanted to get out to the world. And so it was really a lot of effort, and it was well worth it. I think the other thing is just make sure you got a great team behind you, because they did so much work to make this happen in a short period of time.
Well, and speaking of that short period of time, I was going to ask you guys, we've talked about challenges throughout. what's, I guess, if you could summarize some of your top challenges with this, breaking them out into the different areas that you all sort of work in, what are some of those challenges?
Well, I'll start with one thing, just in terms of that timing, that turnaround. You know, when we first said, okay, you know, we're going to rebrand, I was like, okay, well, this will take 6 to 8 months, and you know, we'll do it right, we'll really think it out. And we, at the end, realized we don't have that kind of time, and it was more internal pressure of, you know, again, we're merging two companies, and you know, the different calendars, the different email systems. We were getting impeded in our productivity by these multiple systems, by the multiple names. It's the FreshAddress name, the TowerData name. So that really pushed us to say, no, we got to do this as quickly as possible. And you know, and we did in 3.5 months. And if you know, if you said before, like, hey, let's rebrand in 3.5 months, I'd be like, no way, that's crazy. So you know, accelerate timeline, and I mean, a drawback to that was, you know, the company as a whole was pretty heads down, focusing on these tasks to update the internal systems, get, you know, the billings consolidated, et cetera. So, you know, it might have affected in some ways our, you know, ability to be out in the marketplace because we were more focused on this internal brand in a short time.
Absolutely.
Right,
I think, go ahead, Brian.
Go ahead. I would say, just add to that, from the, as you alluded to, Tom, that, you know, that we were a lot of the company was heads down in this, and now, you know, as we're past it, we see, and we're both, right, both companies were quite mature, and so it was operationally, you know, good cadence for years and years in terms of functioning businesses. And so to pause and dive into this was definitely a challenge for the team. You know, many hours and kind of refocus to make sure, hey, we're keeping things, you know, we're working through this rebrand, but also keeping things operational. And I think everyone is, although we know the work isn't quite done, everyone is kind of finally resetting into, okay, let's get this business as usual now, and operationally getting focused on you know, our normal responsibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for many people, they were doing 2 jobs for a period of time. I know Lizzie's shaking her head. I think the other couple pitfalls that we ran into, you know, when you go to a new website and you have to get everything working just right in the lead flow, you're going to see some impact on your lead volume. And we saw lead volume impact. You need to make certain that all your referral traffic is all aligned, and you updated your logos with partners that help drive traffic to your site. And there's so many other things that, you know, we had to make certain that we hit on. The last thing was the challenge of letting all of our customers know about our new brand. You have to ask yourself, how do you get deliverability to using an AtData new domain when you're mailing it to a FreshAddress or a TowerData list? And so, you know, to some degree, we had to use some of our old platform to notify our clients to get them onto the new platform. And those are just all challenges that you have to think through and be prepared for. And it seems like an easy, we're just going to send it out to our customers, no problem. But if they're not used to getting email from an AtData domain, that becomes a challenge. So you have to think through that also.
Yeah, just to clarify that point on a more technical standpoint, it just, you know, the AtData domain actually had been around. We acquired it secondhand, and so, but because it wasn't used to send mail, you know, a lot of spam filters, corporate spam filters out there didn't recognize it. So, you know, that impacted those open rates. But, you know, bring it back up over time, but not something we had thought about beforehand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it was a very exciting process. We learned a lot along the way. I think.
Also, just to add on this, in terms of design challenges, like, you know, something you often have to overcome is like, or how do you overcome the attachment people have to the existing designs, right? Because obviously everyone in the organization has lived with that for a long time and is used to it and has worked with it. When you think about it, like organizations change their brands for many different reasons. The most obvious reason I think people would probably state is people change their brand because there was something not working or wrong with what they have in place, right? From my perspective, that's actually the worst reason you can have to change your brand, because that actually proves that you should have done it like 3 years ago if you got to that point that it doesn't work anymore, right? In this case, the reason for changing was obviously that, you know, the merger, building a new company and establishing a new name for it, but to really ensure that everyone kind of like sees themselves in this, like, you know, from both companies that are coming together, and also acknowledges and recognizes that this new is actually helping me to excel and helping me to grow and the company to grow. That's part of the challenges when it comes to the design process as well, to make sure like it doesn't feel like, oh my God, we're leaving something so precious behind. It's really, you know, we're carrying the most precious things of the past with us into something that is even more powerful.
Absolutely. And you know, we really took that to heart, what Dirk's talking about. And in fact, we created an internal team called the Culture Club, actually. And it's made up of a number of our employees. And we tasked them with helping us roll out the new brand. And frankly, the Culture Club still continues to provide suggestions and recommendations and organizing, you know, cross-team activities today. So it's going to be a group that will exist beyond just this event and added tremendous value.
I think another challenge was our SEO. You want to talk about that, Brian?
Yeah, SEO, you know, it's improving by the day. You know, we've been keeping an eye on it, both that and the AdWords piece. Google, we've learned a lot about Google and Bing and the way they work together, and when you're changing names and ads and web pages being aligned, and if they're paused, they're still active somehow, and many other things. So that's been a big piece. Phil alluded to or mentioned that you know, looking at leads and those types of things. So a big focus now that the brand has been launched, we're, you know, just coming up on 2 months, is getting that all squared away. It does take a little bit of time, and it was expected, but definitely something to be prepared for.
Absolutely. I think the point you're also making is kind of our closing point, is that this journey isn't over. It won't end. And the exciting thing is, you know, really continuing to evolve our story and know that it's a story that was just, you know, we're in the early chapters. We'll keep writing exciting chapters and evolving the story, but you know, we'll keep updating the website. We're gonna look at how do you add video into part of the strategy, and there's so many other interesting things to come as it relates to our messaging and our product development.
Well, I'm excited for the rest of that journey. So, do you guys have time for a few questions?
Sure.
Some head nods. Okay. One of the questions that came through was, what were those icons that were at the beginning, towards the beginning of the presentation? Jen, if we can hop back, I think those guys. Anyone care to explain what these are?
Yeah, I think these are just some fun, you know, some fun work we did with some variations of the two brands coming together. You know, mostly it's just a little bit of humor for the team internally as we work through the options that we had.
Yeah, and stemming off of that, there was a question about alternatives. So wanted to kind of lead into that one for you.
Alternative names or
alternative names, designs, colors. I think that's what it's leading to, because it's
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Dirk, I think that one deck there might have been what 12 different variations of different icons and colors and all coming together. And I mean, it was, I don't say it was overwhelming, but it was a lot. You had to really sit down, we worked through it, took our time, the team involved narrowed things down. Do you remember, Dirk, about how many different options you gave us, or what you
Yeah,
typically
that
would
sounds like, you know, what we typically do. And I want to stress out that I'm not involved in the design of these things on this page here.
No,
That was not part of our
I'll raise my
design.
hand.
That was not.
I fully
that was not-
apologize.
Fair
not
enough.
part of our design process. But kidding aside, yeah, like you know, as I said before, what we're really trying to do in this development process is to open up our client, you know, like people's minds, right? To see like, okay, where could we like, how far can we push this brand? So what we typically like to show is like, you know, here's something that we would consider as fairly safe, right? And here's something that we consider as like really pushing the envelope. And then here's the, you know, a few options that are kind of like fitting in between to learn and to explore together. Like, you know, what is our comfort zone? And you know, what we always hope from like the design and the brand development side is that we're not expecting to end up on the far right side where it's like, you know, the totally groundbreaking, but we're also hoping that we're not playing it too safe, because often that is like, you know, missing a little bit of an opportunity. And showing that spectrum of different design and branding, or like brand identity solutions, I think helps. It helps us during the exploration process, and it helps also the client to kind of like understand what's possible. And from there, you know, there's different phases of really kind of like funneling this down to like, and that's where, you know, I think Brian, you mentioned, gets challenging, right? How do we narrow this down now to like, you know, directions that we all feel we can all jump on board on and we all feel comfortable with. But that's part of like, you know, of the development process, and also of like, you know, always aligning it back to the strategy and to, you know, what the company's vision is, as I mentioned earlier. If you can do this during this process, the whole decision-making process becomes a lot more educated and a lot easier, because, you know, you're basically eliminating this beast in the room, which is your personal preference. Right? I always tell my students, like when we do critiques of design work, you know, what typically how that goes is someone goes like, I like it, you know, when looking at someone else's work, well, I think it's nice. And I tell them like, you know, I don't care. You know, you might not even be the target audience for this design, right? If you're not the target audience for this design, it doesn't matter whether you like it or whether you think it's nice. So design is always about being appropriate, not about being pretty. It's always about being appropriate, and that always links back to that blueprint, which is, you know, derived from the strategy and all these parameters based on understanding the audience, the marketplace, and where we want to take this brand.
Awesome. Well, I think we're going to end it there, guys. I thank you so much. This is super insightful for everyone who's going through rebranding, for some of the team members who may or may not have been involved or as involved as you guys. This was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Lizzie.
you everyone for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.